So the next way to solve this mathematical problem, that this is particularly one that Germany's been using for many, many years, although again its bubble is pretty much burst now, is exporting and being a net exporter particularly. And how that works is the bank issues a loan, again same old thing, routine, loan of 100 quid. The manufacturer gets 100 quid in his current account. That's the manufacturer's version of that one. Is how he sees it there as cash. It's his asset, it's the bank's liability. And in a similar manner, the manufacturer sees a loan as his liability, which is kind of matches to that one though. What happens is this time round, the manufacturer pays the workers £100 to make 100 goods. And so at the end of the week, the manufacturer's bank account balance sheet looks like stock, 100 units, £100, if you value stock at cost. They still have the loan, 100 quid. It looks like this. What the manufacturer then does, and the workers have got £100 in cash and £100 of wealth cash, and this is the wealth, and again, it goes down to zero. What happens this time is the manufacturers take 20 of those items and they net export them. Now, why do I use the word net? Imagine they took 20 of those items, and because ultimately we're kind of talking about doing this on a desert island type thing, but this is the entire manufacturing base, these are the entire workers, this kind of stuff. So if the manufacturers take 20 items of 20 of these units and send them abroad, but then import 20 units of other stuff in a sort of a standard import-export situation, then in total there'll be 100 units on sale in the country, and they'll still only be £100 to buy them, which they can't do because of the extra profit margin. So then the issue is, so the point is that they net export, i.e. they will, give 30 units, sell 30 units abroad, but only bring back 10. So they ultimately every year they export more than they import. And we can take the imports down to zero to make the things easier. So basically they just export 20 of these units. So when they come to let's export 17. So they export 17 units, and then they have left in stock only 83 units. And they can sell locally 83 units to all the workers for £100 cash and still get these guys, that's all their money gone. The manufacturer's got all his stock gone because 83 been sold domestically, 17's been sent abroad. He's got his £100 back from the local workers, and he will have back from the 17, whatever 17 times 1.2 is, let's say 20 quid back. Can't be bothered getting the calculator. The manufacturer will have the income from the foreign country as cash. So then his balance sheet at the end of the week will show cash, and he's going to have £100 from the local workers. He's going to have 20 quid from the foreign people where he got it, and as far as he doesn't really care where the dosh comes from. In total, he's got 120 quid in. He then takes 100 of that, pays off the loan, and at the end of the week, then he'll have £20 cash, and he'll have £20 profit. So it's a nice situation for the country to be in. And this is how Germany lived for, and net exporters. I think Japan was quite a big net exporter for many years. The economy worked absolutely fantastically. They could sell all their goods. They were getting profit. All the workers were able to buy stuff in the shops. Everybody had a job, and the manufacturer was very happy to go and do this next week. And when the downside of it was that, let's say for instance they were net exporting to England, essentially because it was net export situation, we were paying the Germans £20 a week. We being the UK, we were paying the Germans £20 a week, and we didn't have that £20 a week to pay, so basically we had to borrow it. So we got into more and more debt, and when we got into so much foreign debt we couldn't do it anymore, they would then sell the cars to France, and when they ran out of credit they'd sell the cars to Italy, and then America and They could go around the world, making the world indebted to them, and so they can keep this routine going for quite some time until the whole financial system of the world. So it was a far bigger bubble. One of the things lots of politicians has always been. We used to do it like in the 80s. It was like export drives, because exporting was a very nice way to keep the economy going domestically, without the government debt building up, without having to build lots of fixed assets, without having to do all the other stuff. And what the burden of the build up of debt fell on some other foreigner. So it wasn't a burden that would have to be repaid by taxation domestically later. So quite a nice situation for Germany and for a net exporter to be in. China pretty much doing the same thing now, as far as I know. Right, so that was the other one that they did. Let's go for another one. Another way to solve it. The other way to solve it is here we go. Same old. We have the bank, £100 loan, £100 current account. That's the balance of the bank at the beginning of the session. The manufacturer, let's jump to the next bit where he has £100 worth of stock because he's got people to work for him. The workers have got £100 worth of cash because this is the end of the week now. The manufacturer still has £100 loan. That's the end of the week situation. That's nicely zero. Now the workers have got £100 wealth. So the next source of extra dosh to keep the thing going are these guys, the workers. They're all, in fact, not so much the workers, the consumers, the people. Now what they can do is they can borrow money. And they borrow money in two to three different ways. When they borrow money off each other, if I borrow £10 off my mate, then he has 80 quid and I have 20 quid. And so the net is still 100. So borrowing off each other doesn't really make much of a thing different. But when they go to borrow off a bank or on a credit card, say for instance, or overdraft, then what happens is they come to the shops to buy the one item for £1.20, the second item for £1.20, and we get down to 83 items, £1.20, and then we're out of dosh. If the workers then go on their credit card and borrow another £17, then they'll have the dosh to buy all the other items at £1.20, and at the end of the day, the business can have £120 of income, and the business will have £20 of profit, as we've seen before, and the workers will only be in £20 debt, which does it seem like the end of the world? It doesn't. The next week, for it to continue, the debt of the workers will have to go from 20 to 40. They have to do the same thing again, and then 60. So they end up in a situation of how far can that go until they've got too much debt, and the income then goes on interest and stuff, and the debt is too big compared to the income, and they can't sustain it, and they can't get any more credit. So that's a bubble. Credit cards and overdrafts, which can last a little while. One of the big ones that happened many years ago, not very many years ago, was mortgage debt. And what happened is people had these houses that they lived in, and they started to sell them to each other at ever increasing amounts of dosh. And what was happening then, to sell the house, what would happen is, for example, one person would go and borrow like £200,000 to buy a house. They wouldn't borrow it from each and other individuals. So Jack would have £200,000 less, and they'd have £200,000 more. They'd give that to the person they're buying the house off. So the person who's just sold the house will have £200,000, and then they can spend it on they have the extra dosh. What happens is, that didn't make any sense, did it? They wouldn't have the extra dosh, because if they're borrowing from each other, somebody's money goes up while somebody else's money goes down, and the net effect is still they've got £100, and the business needs £120 to do all the sales and keep the economy going around. But if they go to the banks, and the building society, which is the version of the bank, and they borrow from then suddenly they will borrow £200,000, which in our money, let's call that 17. They'll borrow £17 to buy a house. They will then give that £17 to somebody else who they are buying the house from. And there'll be a certain chain where that person will hit that 17 to somebody else as they kind of use that money to move house. But at the end of the chain, there'll be somebody who goes, right, I've now sold that house, and I'm not going to buy another one, and that money, I don't know, maybe it's somebody's died and the final house is getting sold, then the situation is they will then, that £17 will then be in the economy to be spent here, available to be spent. And for many, many years, the mortgage debt was funding the extra dosh the economy needed to go around. And then we had the big financial crisis, and they kind of realised that they were loaning money to people who had no way of paying it back, and the whole thing popped. So it worked for a while. And then the next one they did, it was student debt. And what they do is the young people at 20 and 30, in their 20s, can no longer afford to go and borrow money to get a house and start a family. And they were said that just the way the job market was, they were forced for every job to go, oh, you need a degree. To get a degree, you need to go into £50,000 debt, and to do that £50,000 debt, they'd go to the bank, and so they'd borrow the money from the bank. The bank would create a loan for them, and that's essentially the extra debt funded by the students would pay for the economy to go around. Students now looking at universities and going, that's not a good deal anymore, and now people are like in their late 20s and 30s after university, and they've just got mountains of debt on them, and no chance of being able to start a family and go and get a mortgage for a house, and they're living in little crummy little bed sits for the rest of their life now. But it kept the economy going around for a couple of years. But that bubble's about to come to an end, and is starting to fade a bit. So we've squeezed every part of the economy. We've squeezed the foreigners. The government has borrowed every single penny it can do. And basically, the different sections of the economy are sort of maxed out now. Now, one of the things the government has done recently in the UK is they borrowed money to do HS2, and they borrow lots and lots of money, and they get people to do, which then adds the cash into the economy, and they get people to build these railway lines. So having done that to build this supposed high-speed railway line, what's also happened is people at the other end of the railway line, or where the railway line's about to do, have started to go, well, let's build houses, and then we can live here and then commute down back to London. And so there's been another mini bubble of housing going on. So government debt, what looks like private debt with the private contractors on, it's kind of a public-private partnership. So both parties are borrowing money, which is providing us with lots of 17s. The building works that's going on at the other end of the project is also providing us with a bunch of more 17s. And now they're looking at closing down the high-speed, the HS2, because it's ultimately a bit of a bad idea, really. It's not very doing much, and everybody's working from home anyway now, so nobody wants to commute even if 20 minutes away from them in London. So that's another bubble. So these are the sort of bubbles that get created to provide the extra 17. And in none of these the usual suspects in these things are, the government's terrible, people are lazy, workers are lazy, management's greedy. All these moral stories are used to account for pretty much every aspect in total of, wherever there's a disaster. Some people say it's the workers, other people say it's the banking system, other people say the government, other people say it's bad luck and fortune and the weather, and they talk about these things, economic cycles and stuff. And bit by bit, they sort of more or less try to give some sort of narrative as to why, we seem to be doing all right for a few years, and then bang, it all goes to pot. But the fundamental reason, not to say that none of those things don't have a value in the whole thing. If you produce a good that's no good, then that's going to, if government is useless, there are problems. They're not without, these are not utterly ungenuine points. But something that's just not looked at all is, if these were all super pure and doing their job perfectly well, we'd still have the same problem. And the basic problem is, we set up a financial system that worked very, very well during a time of expansion of the capital base of the country. And by that I mean roads, railways, canals, shipbuilding, docks, all that jazz. And that financial system worked really, really well. But now we have all these things, and we're actually now great wealth in terms of material capital of the country, in terms of roads and docks and all that kind of stuff. And yet, because we're now short of the 17, and we have now burden of debt in various ways, from mortgage debt, student debt, HS2 debt, and from all the different overhangs of what the stuff I've been talking about so far. They're saying, okay, the economy's not doing so well, and they take wrecking balls to they pull up the railways. They'll get knock down buildings, etc., etc. They'll shut up shops, and there's a part that says some of these things are sort of price caused by nobody wants this stuff anymore, and the price signaling says get rid of it, get something new in that people want. That aspect of it where it is good, but where it's just because we're missing the 17 because we're using an out-of-date financial system, that's the problem. So how do you fix it?